uplifting.
Okay,
Absolutely. So
we're good.
Well, welcome everybody to the Lanterman Coalition's interviews with candidates for the next governor of California, and we are thrilled today to be chatting with Delaine Eastin. Delaine, thank you very much for coming and chatting with us today.
I'm honored to be here, Jordan.
And for those who are joining us online, just a quick note about what's happening in the room. We are at Strategies to Empower People, STEP, here in Sacramento. And thanks to them for hosting. We have a wonderful small audience joining us today as well. And if you're joining us online, then feel free to ask questions as well. And if there's time at the end, we'll see if we can get to a couple of your questions as well online. Today, I and a few others in the room will be asking Delaine questions about the developmental disability community, and if she were elected governor, what her leadership and policies and plans would be. And so we're very excited to have this conversation and talk about the vision for California and the disability community. And if you are watching online as well, if you do ask a question, make sure to include the city that you're in. We just want to make sure where everybody is watching from and who you are, include your name. So let's jump in. Thank you again for joining us and talking. The intellectual and developmental disability community, it cuts through all walks of life. It cuts through all types of communities, rich, poor, liberal, not liberal, far northern, central California, all over the world, in Southern California. And so the question that we want to start with is just, what is your personal and or professional experiences with people with developmental disabilities?
Well, thank you all for the opportunity to be here with you today. I have had a rich life, a wonderful life, and it included, though, having a pair of compassionate parents who taught me always to think about everyone and to respect everyone and to, in fact, find out as much as you can about your neighbors. Love your neighbor as yourself. So in the end, I was privileged to have a first cousin who had Down syndrome. She was a spectacular human being. She is a spectacular human being. She's older than I am. She's in her 70s, and she is still alive. And you know, that's relatively uncommon. She had an amazing mother and father. Her father was my dad's brother. He was an amazing man who had been in Africa and Italy. At D-Day, he parachuted behind enemy lines, and he was at the Battle of the Bulge. So he was a war hero of the First Water. But his greatest achievement was to be a great father. And his oldest daughter, who had Down syndrome, with his wife, who was a teacher, they worked together to make sure that Libby Ann had a wonderful opportunity in this world before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And Libby Ann worked for more than 30 years. Eventually she had a stroke, but she's still living. She has had a real productive life, and she feels like a contributing member of this great country, and I know she is. So that was my early experience. We had a family reunion in Kentucky. They still owned the family farm, so every 2 years when we could, we would go. And so I've known Libby from all my whole life. And I will just say that I also, though, have been privileged to I was living in Union City, and I had the opportunity to run for the legislature. So the schools for the deaf, the school for the blind, as well as the developmental center in Fremont were in my district. I made it a point to go to those schools and to that center. And I'll be honest with you, Hank Klopping, who was head of the school for the deaf, was a brilliant man who educated me. Some of you know Hank. He is a special human being, and he pointed out a number of things to me, and he made it possible for me to join the deaf community in a variety of different celebrations and endeavors. I should also say that before that, I had a good friend whose child was in the ARC in Alameda County and was involved out in the wonderful program they had to help young people with disabilities to work in the big garden project that was out there. And so I got to meet their son and see his life unfold in a better way because there was creativity in Alameda County. I will tell you that one of the things that I became someone who went frequently to the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind, and because of my affinity to the marvelous people there, at one point Hank Klopping said, you know, Delaine, there are deaf children all over this state that are not being served. And not everybody wants to have their child live in Fremont from Monday through Friday, and they live too far away to commute. We should have a Bill of Rights that ensures them service with a sign language interpreter and or someone who can communicate with the deaf student. And so in 1994, I wrote and had signed into law the Deaf Education Bill of Rights. It's one of my proudest moments. And I thank you, all of you, for helping me. It's also true when I became superintendent of public instruction, I visited the School for the Deaf in Riverside. And they told me in the 50-plus years they'd been in operation, the superintendent had never visited. You know, the superintendent of schools for the state only runs 3 real schools. 2 are deaf schools and 1 is the School for the Blind. And so why would somebody have not been there? No superintendent had ever spoken at graduation at the School for the Deaf in Fremont or the School for the Blind in Fremont. I became the first superintendent. I marched in parades with them. I made sure that I was visible and that my team got on their toes about making sure that all of the schools were well managed, well led, and well supported. And I believe very strongly that I learned more from the deaf community and the blind community than I probably could have taught them, that they really helped me to be a better superintendent of schools. And at the end of the day, I'll say to each and every one of you that I believe that every person in California should be entitled to a wonderful life, and that means a wonderful education. So we have to put our shoulder to the wheel, especially on behalf of those children that have special needs and have special challenges, and we have to make sure that they are supported. And I commit to you, as the next governor of California, I know more than any other candidate for governor, and I have made it a point to make your communities be my community, and I thank you for the chance to do that.
You mentioned the ADA in your answer there, and part of this next question you've already answered in talking about the legislation that you authored. You can go further on that or other things. But people with intellectual and developmental disabilities today, throughout this state, throughout the world, face an ongoing fight for civil rights and human rights. And how have you shown a commitment to fighting for these rights?
Well, I do think my visibility at the Schools for the Deaf and School for the Blind, at the Diagnostic Center, my visibility at the conferences that were provided for special education educators, and my willingness to listen and to be engaged. When I got to the department, we were being sued for the failure of the California Department of Education to support many special needs children. When I went in, the first week I was there, I went into the special education director's office, and I noticed that he had a typewriter and a rotary dial telephone. He said he was thinking of retiring. In my mind, I thought, I think you have retired, you're just on the job. So I encouraged him to take retirement, and I brought a special ed director from San Mateo Foster City, a really rock star leader named Alice Parker. Alice went on to be the national chair of all the special ed directors of the 50 states. She is really someone with compassion and conscience, as well as creativity and a brass backbone. And so we improved services at the department when I was superintendent of public instruction. I commit to you as next governor, no one will have ever done a more consistent job of promoting and serving those people with special needs who can nonetheless make enormous contributions to this state. And I believe there is dignity in all work, and I think we have a responsibility to find meaningful work for those who are able to do so, and to find great supports for all people who have the need for special support. I commit to doing that.
And thank you very much for that answer. And the backbone of those services and supports that you were just mentioning for the last 50 years in California has been the Lanterman Act. And it has really given us a platform to advocate for services and supports and civil rights. And how would you as governor ensure that for the next 50 years, there will continue to be services and supports that support people in the community?
Well, I believe that, in fact, as governor of California, I have committed to a leadership that looks like California. So not only will there be women in leadership, there will be, yes, people of color, and there will be people with disabilities in leadership positions. We will showcase the abilities of people who are described as disabled when we know they, in fact, have aspects of their courage and character that make them more compassionate and more able to serve at a time when some people are still quite insensitive. I commit to you that we will, in fact, seek real, honest-to-God leadership. If you notice at Riverside, I changed the leadership there, and it became a much stronger school as a result of the new superintendent at that school. And I commit to you that I will always find really great people with compassion and with experience who will, in fact, relate to special needs Californians and will, in fact, create opportunities for them to demonstrate their skills and their character. And so I'm totally with you all when it comes to our endeavors to make each person feel a sense of confidence and a sense of empowerment. And some people will make different kinds of contributions than others. They're all important, and I know that.
And you touched on employment. You touched on getting people jobs in the community, that every person can make a contribution. And if elected governor, how would you want this state to be a model employer of people with disabilities?
Well, I think the state, we will do first first I'll probably create a task force to examine the state of California and including some of the people in this room, to describe what the state can and should be doing to be more, friendly and outreaching to people in the communities with disabilities. And I really believe that we have an opportunity to showcase the skills and the talents and the character that so many people bring. And there are important jobs that can be done, that should be done, and that we should facilitate being done by people who may be described as people with disabilities. Well, many of them have abilities that we ought to be focused on more than the disabilities. And we can, in fact, bring the best and brightest from around California, including people in this room, to think, how can California work smarter, work faster, better, to provide services, but also to draw in people to contribute to our society.
Mm-hmm. And California's demographics obviously are shifting, and you touched on that as well. And who we are and who makes up California is changing rapidly. And we in the developmental disability system are learning how to serve different communities better as well and struggling along that path. How would you, as California, reach out to different communities, and how have you shown a leadership and experience in reaching out to other communities?
Well, I mean, I have been, first, as I mentioned, when I represented the Fremont area in the legislature, I made it a point to, not only go to the schools for the deaf and the blind and the diagnostic center, but to go to the, our facilities and to actually be present with folks in that community. And so I don't think it's just the state institutions that we should be thinking about, but we also, though, need to help school districts. I mean, I've been around long enough now to know that there are some rural, remote school districts that are not well equipped to help some of their children with special needs. So we have to do more as a state to make sure that we give them some of the training and the encouragement and the tools to make sure they serve every student. One of the things that I've said is that every child in the state should have access to broadband. That would be a huge help for a lot of our students who are in rural, remote parts of the state. And, candidly, don't have a lot of support services, but we could help parents and neighbors and members of the community to know better how they can support their students who are living there who have disabilities, and how we can help them to be facilitated in finding meaningful paths of employment, yes, and of other things, scholarship and different aspects. I mean, different people are, that's what I like to say, we're not McDonald's Happy Meals. We're all different. And, one of the bad things that happens is we talk about deaf people or blind people or people that, have issues of mobility. Each person is an individual, and we have to find ways that we can be more creative and supportive and draw out the best of every person. And I think we are living in an age and in a state, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Everybody's beating up California. Don't look now. We just passed Great Britain. We've got 25 million fewer people. We are a productive state. We just have to have people that are going to roll up their sleeves and say, we have a responsibility to each and every Californian to make sure they fully have an opportunity to express their views and demonstrate their talents and help us to work better and smarter and with more compassion.
Wonderful. And you mentioned developmental centers, and you represented a community that had a developmental center. And historically, they were the only service option for people with developmental disabilities, and obviously that is changing now. And as we have a few left which are scheduled to close in the next couple of years, are there opportunities to redirect those funds used for developmental centers into the community-based service system for people with developmental disabilities?
Well, I think we can and should establish our commitment to communities closer to people, but this money should be not only redirected, it should be enhanced. There should be more resources given to those who, in fact, have challenges to help them to make greater contributions. I learned one time I worked in the private sector, and I had a boss who said, you should always know the difference between expense and investment. You want to keep your expenses down, but you want to know when to increase investment. And I look at services to our communities that have people with some challenges as an investment in their lives and in our society, in our state. I want happy, fulfilled, energized people who feel they belong here and they have a contribution to make. And in fact, they have a responsibility to contribute. So every way we can, we have to be embracing and open and committed to a wonderful life for everyone.
Thanks very much. We're going to take a few questions from the audience. We're going to start with Tara Guido, who has a question for you.
Everyone is struggling with their affordable housing crisis, but people with disabilities often don't have a voice. We're often undershadowed, and I would like to ask you, Delaine, how you would help us have a voice and make sure that we don't get undershadowed.
Thank you for the excellent question. I will just tell you that a few weeks ago, I went to Skid Row in Los Angeles on a Saturday night, and I went to some homeless shelters, and I was heartbroken. First, there were many, many women with children, little children, on the streets. And we know that. I've seen it in LA, I've seen it in Oakland, I've seen it in San Francisco, I've seen it in Sacramento, I've seen it in Davis. It's everywhere. But LA was especially a gut punch for me, because there were not only a lot of women with children, there were a lot of elderly women and a lot of people on walkers, in wheelchairs, on crutches. And I just thought, how could we be doing this? First week, I am governor of California. I will declare a state of emergency as it relates to housing. And we will target immediately any disabled Californians, any senior Californians, and any families with children. Some cases there are women and men. But we have got to look one another in the eye and say, a great state, a great country, a compassionate country cannot have homelessness the way California does have. We are 12% of our nation's population and 25% of the homeless. That is unacceptable. So we're also going to do a full court press to get, yes, some tiny housing units, yes, some vouchers for hotels and motels, yes, some other plans for constructing homeless shelters, shelters that are more individualized for people who happen to be homeless. But we're also going to do long-range thinking about how we build more affordable housing. We have the oldest children in America living at home with their parents. And I know some of you really love your kids, but you might like to see them move out when they're 30, let's say. And we also, though, have so many people that are commuting very long distances to their jobs. You know you're in trouble when you're on the front page of the New York Times on a Sunday above the fold about a woman who was kicked out of her apartment in Oakland because they were making it into condominiums and had to get housing in Stockton. She gets up at 2:30 a.m. in the morning to travel to Oakland. It takes her 3 hours to take public transit into Oakland. She works an 8-hour day, has an hour for lunch, takes her 3 hours to go home. Do the math. That's a 15-hour day. So for everybody in California, we need a full court press on housing. The biggest tragedy is we should have been building 180,000 units a year. For 10 years, we've only been building 80,000 units. So today, we're more than 1 million units short. And I pledge to you that we will ramp up building housing. A couple of the candidates are saying they'll be able to have 1 million a year. Well, don't look now. We don't have enough carpenters and electricians and plumbers to build 500,000 a year. But realistically, we could build upwards of 300,000 a year. And I pledge to you, there will be a special commitment, though, to people who have disabilities and to our seniors and to our mothers with children.
I have another question from Joyce Neely.
Hi, I'm a parent of Amy, my daughter Amy, and my question is, family members often play the role of primary caregiver for their child or sibling with a disability. What proposals do you have to better support families whose work and devotion make it possible for their loved one to remain at home?
Well, thank you for the question. And again, as I said before, I expect the very first week I am in office to gather several different groups of people together to help us to address public policy shortcomings that the state of California has right now. So I will ask you to join me in helping me to better support families in this effort. I think you all know more than I do. And I'm a good student, so I'm willing to learn from you. They say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I really believe that we have an opportunity to draw on families to help us think this through in a much more, supportive and compassionate way. And I ask you to help me to think of some solutions that are absolutely reflect the values of your community. Thank you.
Another question from Jackie Diller-Foss. Jackie, would you mind coming up?
Sure.
So we can get you on camera. Thanks.
I'm really short, so no one can see me. Hi, I'm Jackie Dillard-Foss. I'm the Executive Director of the STEP program, but also I sit on the California Supported Living Network committee. Sorry, and I'm sitting in front of deaf people, and you would think I'd know better, since that's my sister. With providers, we've had rates that are frozen for a long time, and now with the added pressure of local minimum wages, we have 23 counties with local minimum. And then with that minimum wage also comes compaction. We have DSPs, I have direct support professionals who have worked with me for 20 plus years making $13 an hour. And there's no recognition for that to happen. There's no recognition for providers around local minimum. So there's this pressure going on beyond the normal cost of running business. So we keep on being told there's a rate study and there's relief and there's things happening, but nothing does happen. And all I have to do is look at my direct support staff and say, it's coming, show up, it's coming. But what is your plan on dealing with the community-based providers who are struggling with all these cost compressions?
Well, thank you for the question. I do believe that, again, it goes back to this difference between expense and investment. What we're talking about here is an investment. And I think the state must learn how to invest more in making sure we have the most comfortable and productive settings for people to grow in. And what we know is that your employees are in a very expensive part of the state here, but we also know they're doing vital, important work. So the state of California has to step up and figure out better ways to support you, to pay a living wage, and to be, in fact, able to enhance the services you provide. I think, again, it's pay me now or pay me later. I would rather pay now to make sure we have the most productive centers and programs that any state in the union has, so that we can, in fact, help people to have more productive and fulfilling lives. And I commit to you that we will, in fact, work together on ways that we can, as a state, support you better. It is my belief that there is, right now in California, we have lived with Prop 13 for 40 years. And no one has revisited the fact that many commercial industrial properties are undervalued. The fact is that if we were to create some kind of a mechanism, either they get assessed every 10 years, and or they pay an additional amount, 1.5% maybe instead of 1%, we would have some additional money for education as well as for support services for programs like this one. And I commit to you that I will be reviewing that and pushing very hard, unless we pass it in November, which would be great. But we have to be more acknowledging that some of these services are expensive, but they're about soul and conscience and about doing the right things for people. And those need to be priorities of a state. It isn't enough. I want to balance the budget. Of course I do. I'm a fiscally responsible person, but I want to do it with compassion. I want to do it with concern, so that everybody gets a chance to have a wonderful life.
Well, when you think about it, statewide, this is a statewide question, there's 50% turnover rate in our industry.
Well,
when you're talking about human services and we're talking about compassion, the last thing a parent wants is to see that turnover. So thank you.
I so agree with you.
Thank you so much.
A couple more questions, and then we'll close. We have one from Des Malone.
Hello, my name is Des Malone. And how can the state inspire people who work as DSP, a direct support professional, when they have these high skills, but they're not being matched? The pay rate is not aligned, it's not being matched. So how can you inspire these people or the state?
That builds on the previous question, and what I pledge to you as Governor of California is that we will, in fact, have a thoroughgoing review of what we can do, not only to improve financial support, but to improve the morale and the sense of mission that you all provide this state. I really believe we haven't done enough to lift people up. And although I'm not trying to get around paying better, I do think you're entitled to a living wage and to more money than you're making. But I also believe we have to do a better job of being open and welcoming to people that are adding to our country by the work that they do. And there are a whole host of occupations, I would argue, that are not being given enough credit. And one of the things I will say that I did at the Department of Education, I walked around. I went into people's cubicles and offices. They were like, "You're the superintendent and you're in my office? I've never seen a superintendent in my office." But what I found out, there was a lot of people working for me that had a really great ideas, but no one had ever asked them how we can work better, smarter. So what I pledge to you is that we will, in fact, manage by wandering around. We're going to listen to people that work in the state. We're going to inspire them to do an even better job. And those who, are retired on the job, well, we'll ask them please to step down or step aside so we can get people that are on a mission. What I want, and this is what one of my former staff said to me the other day, stopped me on the street, said, the 8 years I worked at the Department of Education were the 8 best of my career, because every day I went to work and I was on a mission. I want you to feel the support that you should have, and that everyone here who is working in this field should have, because in fact, you're changing lives, you're improving people's lives, and you're helping our society be a better place. So I salute you, and I promise you I never forgot where I came from. And I won't forget that I was here. I won't forget any of you. And we will make this a better state for those who happen to have disabilities.
Thank you.
One more question, and we'll offer you some time to close. Rick Rollins, come on up, from Association of Regional Center Agencies.
Hi, thank you for being here today.
It's nice to be here.
As you know, California's developmental services system was founded on the idea of having local regional centers work closely with service providers to meet local needs. What experience has given you the best understanding of importance of responsive and innovative locally based ideas?
Well, the fact is that I did, in fact, visit not only the Schools for the Deaf and the Blind, the Diagnostic Center, but the ARC facilities on more than one occasion. And I do believe that, some combination of my personal experiences and my life experiences, my family experiences, make me rather uniquely positioned to be someone who does, in fact, believe that the future can be better, brighter, if we have something called optimism. They say, remember I said already, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When I was at Mills College teaching, I had a marvelous young student who'd been kind of a wild child, and she had finally gotten her life together, and she was doing well and getting great grades, and she all of a sudden wasn't feeling well, and it discovered she had MS. And so together we worked to help her to complete her college education. She was from North Carolina. We became good friends, and she did complete her education. Along the way, though, she was a psychology major. And when I was at UC Davis back in the day, psychology was the study of mental illness. It really wasn't about creating a positive environment. Well, she was into positive psychology, and she gave me a real education. I read a ton of books in this area because of her, and one of the ones I like is Learned Optimism. Some of you are smiling. I think you must have read the book. It's a marvelous book in which the author says, Martin Seligman is the author. The author says, we used to think that people had achieved great things because of a combination of talent and hard work. But it turns out a lot of talented, hardworking people don't achieve. What they're lacking is optimism. So what I commit to you is that I will be an optimistic governor, and I will, in fact, build on what you're doing locally. We won't govern from the top down. We will, in fact, move out into the state. I visited schools in all 58 counties when I was superintendent. They call it managing by wandering around. I promise that I will continue to wander around California, to listen to you, to include people on all the task forces, not just the one on the disabilities task force, but all task forces should have people that look like the people in this room. A diverse, a talented group of people that can and will contribute different aspects, different perceptions of how we should be working and what we can be doing. I say to you that I believe that you can help me. I don't know everything about everything. I'm one of those people that knows a little bit about a lot of things, but I know how to get talented people in the game and help us to build better policies in California. I've always done that, and I pledge to do that when I'm governor of California. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Just want to give you a chance to have some few closing words for the disability community in California.
Well, my thanks to all of you for being here. I mean it sincerely. I really do think when I look around the room, I see optimistic people. And that's what we need. We need optimistic people who will lead. And yes, some of them may have disabilities, but for me, you also have abilities. You have a different perspective and different take on how we can and should be doing things. And I pledge to reach out to you, to pick your brains and to have you put your wonderful talents to work on behalf of California. I think we can do better. And there's a jingle I like. So weep, my friends, be blithe, be gay, or weep, my friends, with sorrow. What California is today, the rest will be tomorrow. We did, in fact, start early to do some important things. We sort of paused for a while. It's time for us to recommit to every person in this state. And those of you who are characterized as having disabilities also have great abilities. And we're going to work on making sure that we support you in all areas and that we together build a better California over the next few years, one that will in fact support you and your families and your friends who have special challenges. So I thank you all so very much for letting me come today and for listening to my story. And one of my best friends, a man named Michael Collins, Michael had polio as a kid and he's in a wheelchair. But you know what? He was kind of depressed at one point. He had a bad accident when he was getting his PhD and he just was going to go on disability and just give up. But he managed to get, and I give some credit to my husband and I at the time, we encouraged him to apply for a job. He was all but dissertation, and to apply for a job, and he was like, nobody wants me, I have polio. And eventually Jack my husband worked at Livermore Lab, and so he insisted that Michael apply for this job. And you know what? Michael got the job, and he worked his whole adult life and made a huge contribution to this state, to our country. And there was a point where he doubted himself. We've got to help people, not just to have opportunities, but to believe in each other and to believe and to have that optimism that I spoke about. So thank you. I am very optimistic that we can do this. Help us spread the word. Really appreciate the chance to be with you.
Delaine.